Yo, what's up everybody? This is Chase, aka Hellavision, and today I'm basically going to break down how I go about mixing down my tracks. So, everybody always asks me, dude, why does my song suck? And mainly it's because it's not mixed well. So, a shitty song that's mixed well is way better than a good song that's not mixed well because it's gonna fucking destroy sound systems and your reputation if you don't do this right. So, this is basically a song that I've made that is at the end stages. I'd say I might add a little bit more flavor stuff here and there, but I wanted to basically just mix this sucker down. So the first thing that I do is like bounce everything to audio, and that's really important because when you bounce shit to audio, you're not using your computer to do work anymore. You're basically just recording the straight up audio. So I would recommend that you do that for most of your tracks before you start mixing shit down. So I'll just play you a little bit of the track so that you can get a feel for what kind of shit I'm making. So here we go. Alright, so, I mean, you get the point, right? So, basically right now, the volumes of everything aren't as leveled as I want them to be, especially in the bass. Some of these are just not too hot, so, basically you just want everything to sound cohesive and kind of mesh together. So, first of all, in my mix downs, I make sure that I basically remove all the tracks that I'm not using and rename everything to what it's actually doing, because that'll save you a lot of time running around and seeing what's what. See, like this reverse sound, I should have not put in the basses. So I'll go ahead and throw that in here. And Alright, so the first area I like to focus on is the drums, because your main kick and snare is basically what's going to make or break your track. And a lot of times when the kick and snare aren't that great, it's not that great for your mix. So let's see which one I am. Alright, so basically what I do for my kicks and snares, so this doesn't have any processing on it. So I like to use a little glue compressor action, and what that does, I can show you more visually with a plugin called Sexy Smexoscope. So I use this to look at the sound, and a lot of times when you're making kicks and snares, you want to have a knife-like shape. This one's kind of lacking in the knife area. You kind of just want it to go have a sharp transient and then go down from there. So we can use the compressor to kind of do this. So what that's doing, when you have the threshold to 0, it's basically a limiter. So with the soft clipping enabled, it squares that out. So when you square it out, it's kind of, it can distort it a little, but I like to start there. And then, so I have this one, and we're just limiting the shit out of it, or just pushing it up to max capacity. And then we'll start to shape it from there. So you can already see how that's better from the original. So the reason you want your kick to look like that is to basically make room for your other drums. And playing with the compressors with this plugin really taught me to see what the compressor is actually doing to the sound, because it can be confusing at first. So you might want to lower the threshold here. We're not getting that sharp of a transient at the beginning. So you can see if I lowered that, as I increase it, I'm feeding into the next compressor, and it shaves off just a little bit of it. So you can either use this 0.1 release time, which is pretty quick, or you can use the auto release. I get pretty good results with both of those. You can also decrease this range thing. That can also help with compressing your kicks. So that sounds pretty solid right now. Without it, you basically get this really shitty sound. So that's slapping pretty nicely. And we're gonna go ahead and throw an EQ on it. So that's slamming pretty hard. And forgive me if my keyboard is the clickiest keyboard in the land, but it is, so we'll have to deal with that. So for the low cut, you're not really going to use anything below 40-ish, 37, because your sub bass is gonna sit right there. And then you might add like a dip right here in the 100 hertz range to kind of get that area more clean. And you can also do this, increase the Q, and check for some resonant peaks in this area. So right there, it's kind of resonant peaky. And what I mean by that is whenever it's kind of, it'll stay, it sounds like a resonant peak. I don't know how to describe it other than that. You can kind of look up what that is, but I'll say that a lot in this video. But yeah, that's gonna make it a little more clean. And then I mean, having the noise in this area is fine, because really you kind of want your kicks to sound good across all devices. So if it's playing out of a smartphone or something, you want it to still slap here. But you may want to clean that area up too a little bit by just having a little dip. See, like right there. And you can kind of tighten that up. So let's look at Smexoscope again. So, alright, that's looking a little better. So yeah, that's basically the kick, and I mean, you can go way deeper with it, but for our sake here, that's generally how I'll do a kick drum, is like a couple glue compressors, and you can even add like another one to shape the thing further. So now I'm making it even more knife-like. So that's kind of why you would want to use more than one compressors to get that. See, like that shape right there is perfect. Well, not really, but yeah. There we go. And yeah, you can basically do that forever until it sounds right and looks right. A lot of the time, looking at it with the Smexoscope gives you a lot more insight as to what it's actually doing. So yeah, that's a lot punchier than what we started with. So you can barely hear the snare over that. So the next thing I'll do is the snare. And yeah, this one, I may switch the samples on that. But, alright, so this is what I would do for that. So I have it in a drum rack here, and I have a couple things in there. So I would simply yeah, it might be easier if I do this. So whenever I have an infinite drum rack, and you can look up the infinite drum rack thing, it's Bill Gates' the proprietary, it's not proprietary, but it's his technique or whatever that I use a lot. So this will be just the kicks, and this will be the snare. So I will delete all the kicks on this one, and then process it like that. So let's go ahead and grab our sexy scope, wherever that went. Okay, so it's pretty good already. The only thing is it doesn't have that really snappy texture that we want. I'm going to resave this. So I might choose like a different snare. So this is kind of like a noise layer, and that's our clap layer. Yeah, that's sounding way better. So let's turn this amp up and we can see it better. Yeah. So pretty knife-like already, but we're still going to add that glue compressor to make it snap a little better. And a lot of times this is all you need, is really just limiting it with the glue compressor with the soft flipper enabled. And then, yeah, you can see how that really shows the transient. Yeah, there we go. Some other things that I'll do with the snare is add an erosion if it's not that crisp sounding, but this one's pretty crisp already. Another thing, if you do your drums in MIDI, always check the velocity settings, because that can mess you up. If they're inconsistent, when you freeze it to audio, it's not going to be at the same volume every time. I might want to take this noise layer and like fade it a little bit. Whoops. So we can use the decay for that. So that way the tail isn't dragging out, and that'll make it cleaner for everything else to kind of come through. And then finally you'll want to EQ it. Some people like low in their snares, and they'll keep it to like out here, but I kind of like to get that area cleaned up if it's not real dominant in that sound area in the low end. And a lot of times I'll boost the thing right here. This is like where the main snare is, right there, and that way it just kind of cuts through a little bit more, makes it a little more sharp. And a lot of times I'll take like a high boost right here to boost up those high frequencies. You can also do it like this, or you can do both. But I found that when I start using this multi-band compressor, it really brings out the high end. Because essentially what you're doing is you're taking the low frequencies and pushing them up, because this is upward compression. And you can dial that in. And obviously we're clipping like shit, so. So yeah, that's already starting to sound better. So what I'm gonna do is kind of reduce the volume on everything a few decibels here. So this is all my drum group area. This is my musical area. So organizing everything into groups is really crucial so that you can process everything the same. So I'm going to take everything down like 12 dB in the group. And the reason I'm doing that is because when you mix down, you want to make everything quieter, and set your, or a rule of thumb that I use is like, try and mix everything down to so that the kick and snare are at -12 dB. And some people will do -6, but it's really up to your preference. So the kick, Oh, I also forgot to mention this. So we have our kick here. In the EQ, you want to go to sides and also cut the lows of the kick. So what that's doing is it's removing it from the stereo area, and you can do that the same for your snare. So I'll do that. And the reason being is you generally don't want too much side information happening in here, and it makes everything sound a little bit more clean. So let's make sure our kick is hitting at 12, or at least around there. Another thing you might do is add a utility and balance. What am I trying to do here? Turn it to mono, at least for the kick. And that basically makes it clean on both sides there. So I'm not getting any more of that shit where it was like one's higher over here and one's higher over there. Sometimes I clip the snare past -12 and that ends up making it sound a little tighter, so it's up to you. You can bend or break rules as you want. So now that that's basically set up, you can freeze that to audio. So we'll do that real quick. Alright, so we can actually see our kick and snare now. It's looking pretty good. Yeah, that's basically what we wanted. So we got some knife-like shit going on. Perfect. So I like to kind of clean it up a little bit more. Why is that one lower? Sometimes the processing will apply things to the same sound differently. So what I'll do with that is anally go through and paste in the same snare so that it's all consistent. And you can see that how that's changing that. Click, 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 click. So same thing over here. And you can do it for the kicks too, but a little easier to just bust it out for the snares real quick. Alright. So our kick and snare are pretty much good. So then we have the snare layer. Yeah. This is like the pre-drop snare, so I might make that a little less loud than the drop snare. But overall, you want to EQ it, the pre-drop snare, pretty much the same way you would do the snare. And cut all the lows out and all that. So, That has a little V-Room on it. I definitely recommend downloading V-Room and buying it. Alright, so then I'll just go down the list here. So this is some drums that I recorded and added some reverb on it. So let's just make sure, yeah, it's basically good. Yeah, that's pretty much fun. Snare rolls, I didn't even use this. Alright, our hi-hats. So, same thing with Smexoscope. You can kind of use Smexoscope to see if your hi-hat transients are going pretty good. So, let's solo them. Yeah, I mean, generally you're not going to change much. I put a little reverb on my hi-hats. Pretty short reverb. Just make sure all the velocities are good. And what do I got here? Alright, so yeah, let's just EQ this a little bit. So yeah, for hi-hats, you're not going to want much past here. Same thing for the sides. You can add a little OTT if you want to the hi-hats. That can make it pop a little. So, I know that my hi-hats aren't going to be that loud. Yeah, that one needs to be lowered in volume a little bit. Alright. And then, what is this here? Yeah, little drum action. Again, kind of the same thing. Yeah, it's just a little break. And yeah, we'll call that break. And then what do we have here? These are my second drum layers. And I've already kind of EQ'd that. Although that thing is pretty sharp. So I might want to lower that. Yeah, it's being filtered out anyway. And what else we got? A reverse. Yeah, reverses, I basically do the same thing every time. Alright, maybe a little harsh right there. Let's lower that drop bass a little bit more. And our musical shit. I got like one pad on this. Can delete the stuff that we're not using. I'm not even using that. So, yeah, we can just freeze that. Flatten, and voila, our pad. So our pad, we're basically going to want to do the same thing. Might want that low end here. Could sound cool. And then sides, yep. Basically every time. So I'm gonna copy that, and we got a texture here. Yeah, you can barely hear that. Another thing that I just did right there, fades are basically everything. When you do convert to audio, you want to have a fade on the beginning and the end of the clip, because otherwise you might get like a clicking sound when it comes in, and they can make the speaker pop and not sound as good. So I'm not gonna level everything else yet, but we'll level the sub and the kick, and that's basically the beginning of the mixdown leveling. So again, make sure you have your velocities all set up, and then delete what we're not using. And then we're gonna freeze these. Let's level them first though. So your bass, your sub bass, you're gonna want to have at basically negative 18 to 24-ish. Your kick and snare are gonna be hitting here, and the sub is gonna be the most powerful thing in your mix, and it's gonna whack people in the face on those festival speakers. So it depends on what your sub sounds like, really. Like I've gone all the way down here, and I've gone all the way up here, so it's up to you. You can also use the limiter trick to kind of keep it the same volume. So we could do this and make the ceiling minus 18. But the problem with that is it'll add a little distortion. So you have to lower this gain knob. So as it pitch bends, it's basically staying around the same volume. And I like to use pitch bends a lot. So, but sometimes it's just better to not use the limiter. But again, that's up to you. As far as EQ, you kind of want to do this thing. You don't want anything up here for your sub, unless you're doing ridiculous pitch bends to 200 hertz or whatever that is. And then we have our second. This is more like an 808. We'll get that around the same volume. So you want to do the RMS and not the peak. So it's peaking around here because that fart noise at the beginning. So you want it to kind of be at the average volume. That's what RMS basically means. Yeah, we'll freeze it. Flatten it. And so, yeah, it's basically good. You want to fade these in just the slightest bit, and it'll make your sub sound way better. Like microscopic nano fades. Because it gives it a little space to breathe between each hit. And you might not think that's a big difference, but these popping sounds and the way that it kind of, the compressors and the synths work with MIDI, it'll leave this tail thing and it'll kind of sound weird. You may choose not to do that, but I found that it really helps me. It's a little extra work, and I've been getting a little bit lazier at doing it just at the end of each bar. But every time the sub hits, like another time, you kind of want to do this. And I noticed a huge difference when I started doing that. Because when you limit this, when you're mastering at the end, like that thing right there, you can hear that click sound. Instead, that kind of smooths it out. And that's probably the best piece of mixing advice that you'll get in here. It's just fade the shit out of everything. And it's annoying, but you gotta do it. See, I can just tell where those hits are. And yeah, you basically see what's gonna go on. And I'll go back and fade all these because it's kind of a lot, but I just did that half a section pretty quick. And then, yeah, what's going on here? That kind of shit. It's kind of because it's like an 808 and it's got that slap in the beginning. But that slap is going to come from our kick, so we don't necessarily want too much of that, because that low end is still going to be there in our kick. And then these things, you can either delete them or do this as it comes to an end. Alright, so we'll do the drop bass last because that's just a ridiculous amount of bass. And we'll go into our risers and basically put this on the whole thing because we're not going to want any low end in here. So yeah, we're gonna like copy this. It's good to have group processing EQs, and then it's good to have single channel processing combined, because it's gonna remove that shit before it hits the group. Yeah, fading, that's good. Reverse. Your reverses, you kind of want to fade before it hits the next thing, because it just sounds way better. See if I did it on all of them. Yep, that looks good. This one's loud. Anything that's white noise is going to be way louder. Yeah, this is kind of just a low end thing. It's an impact. So we'll take the side out of that. And then, what is this? Another impact. Yeah. There too, so we have more reverse action, and we got this thing, another reverse, what the heck is that? Oh, it's our break thing. So I might auto filter that. Do a little bit of this action before the drop.
Kilt or tenorous. Kilt or tenorous. Kilt or.
Oh, the second drum, that's what it is too. So we can just copy that and we'll copy over.
Kilt or tenorous.
And then we'll remove that.
Kilt or tenorous.
Alright, where were we? Yep, remove the sides and the lows, sides and lows, sides and lows. Where it stops, nobody knows. Ooh. Bep. And then, oops, move that. I guess this would be a good time to talk about resonant peaks. So I have something called the resonant peak EQ, and we can go through and look for what's called resonant peaks. It sounds like shattered glass in your face. So anywhere where this thing was like singing, you basically want to cut that out. Like right there. And you want to do it for the sides too. And we'll take that down. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much good, right? Oof. Is that faded? Yeah, pretty much. So we'll add that resonant peak thing again. And sometimes you might like decrease the Q. And yeah, just feel free to do this to your heart's content, because the less resonant peaks you have in your mix, the better your shit's gonna sound. Fade that. I'm just pressing F on the keyboard for the fades. Yeah, this is kind of anal, but so is this whole industry. So, got that. That's pretty good. And we'll move down to the vocals. So, I like to use a plugin called Wider, and it's free by Infected Mushroom Polyverse. I'll just put that on the whole group. And we can EQ that further. Ooh, you see all that nasty shit? That's gonna really hurt some faces right there, is what that's gonna do. Oops, I have this on the wrong thing. Yeah, that's gonna be fun to get rid of. You can resonant peak that thing. Alright, well, I'm gonna take a break here, and there will be a part 2, and I will attach it, because we still need to do a bunch more shit that I didn't think I'd be able to get to, so hope you learned a lot so far, and then the next section will cover the drop bass and finish up these vocals, so, and I will teach you about the pink noise trick, which is holy as shit. Peace, y'all. Alright, I'm back. So, I put in a little more time on this, past what I was doing with the video, and started tweaking the vocals a little bit. I'm by no means a perfect vocal mixer, but I can get it pretty good with some basic EQing. Just cutting out the lows of the sides and the mids. Adding shit like Valhalla Room and Wider is going to improve your vocal sounds a lot, because it kind of just gives it more space and lets it fill up the stereo image. What I did also is I went through and did the pink noise trick and when I started doing the pink noise trick, my mixes started improving like 1,000%. So the idea is that you have your pink noise, it creates this perfect slope, and this is kind of what you want your track to look like in the end. So you want your low frequencies the highest in volume, and then your high frequencies the lowest in volume, and it kind of goes down that slope there. So I use this pink noise VST plugin, it's free, and if I'm mixing at minus 12 dB, then I'll set this sucker at minus 6 dB, so it's a little louder than that, and then just go through, and everything that isn't the kick and the snare or the sub, I'm gonna compare it with that pink noise, and then it's gonna give me an objective baseline of kind of where everything is sitting in the mix. So for things like bass leveling, it works really well, and you're gonna have to play with it after you do this. It's not 100% perfect the first time. Shit may sound louder than others, and basically you want to use this as a reference. And if you compare this by just holding the solo button and then holding control or command if you're on a Mac, and basically soloing that sound and comparing it. So when you do that, you want to lower the volume of whatever, or increase the volume so that you can hear it over the pink noise, and then you want to decrease it so that you can just barely hear it going through the pink noise. And for whatever reason, that works for me. And if you kind of do all the basses the same, then you'll end up with something that's fairly consistent. And then from there, you can tweak it and mangle it to your heart's desire. I do this for like the hats too, because hats are really high frequency things. So you can basically see where it's poking through, and definitely recommend doing that. So this is going to be post me doing the pink noise trick, so you guys don't go deaf. So I think everything here is basically leveled like I want it to be, and I was gonna do some like group processing. So I use Isotope Trash as my saturator sometimes for like group processing, and I like this preset because it's not too crazy, but it gets the job done. So gentle push. I mean, literally just turn that on and shit sounds just a little more saturated and nice. You can also add some OTT on your final bass chain. You can use the Xfer plugin or the Ableton one. Sometimes I'll just add like 10, 5%, and that makes a pretty big difference. So that's pretty much that. Also the kick, I dialed that back a little bit, so it looks like that now, and I feel like it sits a lot better in the mix. The other one that I did earlier was just punching my chest way too hard, so had to dial that back. So I think this is looking and sounding pretty good. So at the end here, I'll take a look at like using span, and you can also use the Ableton Spectrum if you don't feel like downloading that, but I recommend downloading span. It's just pretty good because it takes that pink noise slope and it makes it so that it's flat with a certain preset. You have to turn this slope to 4.5, and once you do that, you can see that, I'll show you. So basically you want everything pretty much flat. I know I've got some curve action here. I don't have much going on in this area, so it's kind of just sub bass and high frequencies and some wobbles. Also with span, you can hold the control button and drag around in the mix while it's happening, so that helps a lot. So this is like your high frequencies, and you can kind of hear the whole song through this, and it's one of the 3 extremes. And then there's our sub. This is like mid bass. So that's pretty decently filled up. So your goal with mixing is to basically make it look like the pink noise, or either in that downward slope looking thing with the spectrum, or the flat looking thing with span. I did a little trick with the snare, just added some saturation and reduced that, and I think it's punching pretty nicely. And yeah, I mean, that's basically it. With mixing, you basically want to just keep tweaking it, keep messing with it, make sure that your shit looks like that slope. The last thing that I'll do is sidechain. So, let's see, how should I do this? So I'll basically group everything in one big group and call it sidechain. And I use a Gatekeeper, which is a plugin by Polyverse, and definitely recommend getting that. You can also use LFO Tool for this same thing, but you make a MIDI channel with an external instrument and then send the MIDI to this return channel, which is where Gatekeeper is, and then this basically triggers on every kick and snare. So I'll delete that, and then I will do something. Alright, so that's going to trigger there, and it's basically just poking away or ducking away everything really quick for those kick and snare transients. So it's basically barely noticeable, but it does make a huge difference. And you can see it's like triggering every time a kick or snare happens. So that on its own is not going to do anything. So what you have to do is change this and set it to sends only. And then turn this up, which is the send, all the way to 100. So you don't want it to be like too late like that, or it'll start sounding like house music. Unless you want to make house music, but I don't. pretty much it. For me, just leveling the basses is kind of one of the hardest parts, and I might use Smexoscope and kind of look at what the waveforms are looking like. And you can see some of them are fairly inconsistent, but as long as they're around the same area, you're pretty much good. And you can use like a compressor to kind of help level like the peaks out, and you can do like some slow compression. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, that's basically it for mixing. I mean, I've just sidechain shit with Gatekeeper and then process everything kind of individually, and we're pretty much good to go. You can also just render the track and look at it. I mean, I'm a highly visual person, so looking at shit is very helpful for me. Okay. So let's go ahead and do this. Set it to resampling, and we'll record it.
Kilt or tenorous. Sniffy.
yeah, so I like doing this just to like double check, and like shit like this that pokes out at you. I mean, it looks like obviously too loud. You would go back and then this is just in the channel, but you could turn that down. But yeah, stuff like that, visually, you can kind of identify so that when this does get mastered, you're not pushing the shit out of this and the limiter isn't distorting that super loud part compared to other stuff. So it's kind of the anal part of mixing, is you want to get everything kind of fairly balanced. And really I should have kind of compressed this a little more, but we'll roll with it. It's all good. But yeah, I mean, the main thing is like do your best, but you know, at the end of the day, you want to just crank out more tracks. You want to mix good enough. You don't want to have to be Skrillex every time you mix your first track. So if it doesn't sound 100% right, I mean, you just learn by doing it more often and just getting the hang of it, doing different techniques and all that shit. So, alright, so I think I'm going to close this video out and tell you guys to have a happy life. Yay!